I didn't even realize I was smiling until she pointed it out. "You're smiling too much," she said, not looking at me. Her eyes still following the receipt paper spooling out of the register. Her tone was light, but not careless. The kind that makes you second-guess whether she's teasing or warning you. "And because I'm terrible at leaving silence alone," I said, "because I know what you're thinking. I shouldn't have." The words tumbled out like I'd rehearsed them, though I hadn't. The kind of thing that sounds cocky in a movie but feels reckless in real life, especially when it's aimed at a woman like her. We were in the small corner bookstore I work at, the kind with too many shelves packed too tight, where you can hear the hum of the old ceiling fan in the quiet moments. She wasn't supposed to stand out. She was just another customer with a book in her hand. But then again, she wasn't. She always came late afternoons, when the light outside had that soft orange bend to it. Always in pressed slacks, a fitted blouse, hair pinned back just enough to look like she hadn't tried too hard, though I knew she had. She carried herself like someone who'd learned a long time ago how to command a room without raising her voice. I watched her tuck the receipt into the back of the book without looking at it, like she already knew the price didn't matter. That confidence, it had a weight. It made the air around her feel sharper, more precise. She finally looked at me after what felt like too long. A half smile, unreadable, the kind that made my chest feel tight. "Oh? And what exactly am I thinking?" That's where I froze. Because the truth was, I didn't know. Not really. I only knew I wanted to. The fan clicked overhead. A kid in the back shifted a chair too loudly. My hands, still resting on the counter, curled against the wood to keep them from fidgeting. She tilted her head slightly, waiting, not impatient but certain I wouldn't answer. Instead, I shrugged and said, "Probably that I should mind my own business." Her laugh was quiet, but it cut straight through the hum of the store. "Smart boy," she said, and turned away with the kind of grace that made walking look like a choice, not a habit. I watched her move toward the door, her hand brushing the shelf as if she needed the anchor. Just before stepping out, she paused, looked back over her shoulder only for a second. Then she left. The door shut behind her, and the room seemed too still, as if the fan had stopped turning. I stayed standing there, stupid grin fading, realizing I'd forgotten to breathe. It wasn't romance. Not yet. Just a sliver of something I couldn't name. An unfinished sentence in the air. And that night, I kept replaying her voice in my head, like I missed something, or maybe wanted something. The next time she came in, I told myself I'd act normal, polite, just another customer, another book. But the moment she stepped through the door, my resolve folded. Her presence felt dangerous. Not in any obvious way, but in the way a match feels dangerous near dry paper. She wasn't supposed to be someone I thought about outside of the shop. But she was. That day she carried no book, just her bag slung across her shoulder, and that same air of composure that made everyone else shrink back a little. She came straight to the counter and asked, almost casually, "Do you have a minute?" I hesitated. Customers don't usually ask that. And she wasn't just a customer. She was on the board of the library across the street, which technically made her my boss's boss. That connection alone should have been enough to keep a line drawn. But I nodded anyway. We ended up in the cramped little office behind the counter, where the air smelled of old paper and coffee grounds. She set her bag on the desk, carefully, as though even the gesture carried weight. "I'm cleaning out my late husband's bookshelves," she said. "I thought maybe the shop would take some of them, or at least help me figure out which ones should be kept." Her voice caught on that last word. Barely. If I hadn't been staring at her too closely, I wouldn't have noticed. I wanted to say something kind, but nothing came out. Instead, I watched the way her fingers tapped against the strap of her bag. Steady at first, then uneven. A rhythm she couldn't keep. "That's not urgent," she added quickly, softer, as if she regretted asking me at all. "I just didn't know who else to." "I'll help," I said, cutting in. Too fast. Too eager. She looked at me then, eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing whether I understood what I just agreed to. And maybe I didn't, but I wanted to. Her perfume was faint, something warm, woodsy, almost like sandalwood, and it clung in the air between us. My chest tightened. I wondered if she noticed how still I was standing, how I couldn't quite figure out what to do with my hands. "You notice things, don't you?" she asked suddenly. Not accusatory, just curious. I swallowed. Sometimes. That hung between us, heavier than it should have been. She reached for her bag again, then stopped. "Could you stay a little longer tonight? After close? I think it'd be easier to go through them when the shop is quiet." Her hand brushed my arm when she said it. Just lightly, probably nothing, but it sent a current through me I couldn't ignore. I almost told her I'd been thinking about her since the last time we spoke. The words pressed against the back of my teeth, but I bit down on them hard. Instead, I just nodded, and the silence after felt louder than anything else. The shop was empty by the time we started on her husband's books. The street outside had gone quiet, the kind of quiet where you could hear the tick of the old clock above the door like it was keeping score. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a neat stack of hardcovers beside her, dust clinging to her sleeves. I stayed standing at first, pretending to be busy with the boxes, but really I was just watching her hands as she moved through the collection. Slow, deliberate, pausing longer than necessary on certain titles. "This one?" she murmured, holding up a cracked leather spine. He always read it when he couldn't sleep. Her voice softened, thinned at the edges. She placed the book gently on the keep pile, like it might shatter if she let it go. I crouched beside her before I realized I'd moved. "You don't have to do this tonight," I said quietly. Her eyes flicked to mine. For a second, there was no board member authority, no polished exterior, just a woman caught in a memory. Her lips parted as if to answer, but nothing came. Instead, she exhaled, long and shaky, and in that breath I could feel how close I was to hearing something she hadn't told anyone else. I should have looked away, but I didn't. Her fingers brushed against mine when we both reached for the same book. Too light to matter, too heavy to ignore. My chest tightened, every part of me too aware of the warmth of her skin. That's when my phone buzzed. Loud, abrupt, shattering. I snatched it out of my pocket, fumbling to silence it before the sound embarrassed me further. The screen lit up with my best friend's name. For some reason, I turned it face down on the floor, pretending it hadn't happened. "You should answer," she said softly, almost teasing. "I don't want to," I admitted before I could stop myself. Her gaze lingered a beat too long. Then she smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Dangerous thing to say. I laughed under my breath, shaky. "Yeah, I'm starting to realize that." We went back to the books, but it wasn't the same. Every movement felt closer, every silence thicker. I tried to focus on the stacks, but my mind kept replaying the way her fingers had grazed mine. At one point, she leaned forward to slide a book into the box, and her shoulder brushed against my arm. I froze. The scent of her perfume mixed with old paper, and I couldn't make myself shift away. She didn't move either. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, almost daring. "We're not really talking about books anymore, are we?" The words landed between us like a line being drawn or erased. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came. And in that silence, I swear the air tilted, as if we were both leaning toward something we shouldn't. The pile of books had dwindled, but neither of us seemed in a rush to finish. The office light buzzed faintly above us, and the room felt smaller than before, like the walls were inching closer with every word left unsaid. She picked up a thin volume, thumb brushing the frayed edges. "He gave me this on our 10th anniversary, she said quietly. "I told him I loved it. Truth is, I never even opened it." Her laugh was short, almost bitter. She set it aside, Not in the keep pile. Not in the donate. Just away, like she couldn't bear to categorize it. I swallowed. Maybe some things don't have to be kept or thrown away. Maybe they're just reminders. Her head turned sharply toward me, and for a second, I thought I'd said too much, but her eyes softened. You talk like you've lived twice as long as you have. I wanted to tell her why, about how often I'd felt older than the people around me, how being noticed by her felt like more than it should. Instead, I just shrugged. Or maybe I just listened too closely. That was when she leaned back against the desk, arms folded. Her gaze pinned me in place. And what is it you think you're hearing from me? The air thickened. My pulse hammered in my ears. I opened my mouth, closed it again. She waited, not rescuing me from the silence. Finally, I exhaled. That you're tired of pretending. The words slipped out raw, unpolished. They hung in the air between us, heavier than any box of books. She blinked slowly, her lips parting just enough for me to see the shift. Not surprise, not anger, but something closer to recognition. You shouldn't say things like that, she whispered, but she didn't look away. I felt the pull, strong and reckless, like gravity itself was tilting us toward each other. My hand twitched at my side, aching to close the distance. Then, a knock at the front door. Sharp, sudden, jolting. We both turned, startled. The shop was closed, the lights dimmed. Whoever it was shouldn't have been there. I'll check it, I said, my voice rough, uneven. But she reached out and caught my wrist before I could stand. Her grip wasn't firm, but it stopped me cold. No, she said softly, shaking her head. Let it be. Her hand lingered longer than it needed to, warm against my skin. The knocking faded, replaced by silence that was somehow louder. She looked at me again, eyes darker now, searching. Tell me, she said, barely above a breath. If I stopped pretending, what would you do? The question settled in the air like a lit match waiting for oxygen. I couldn't answer. Not yet. So I just stared back, knowing that whatever I said next would change everything. The silence between us stretched, taut as wire, her question burning in the air. If I stopped pretending, what would you do? I still hadn't answered when she turned suddenly, almost as if retreating from her own words. She pulled another book from the box, a faded hardcover, the dust jacket torn. Her hand froze halfway through setting it down. Her eyes flicked to me, unreadable. You shouldn't be here, she murmured, softer than before. I frowned. What do you mean? She traced the book's spine with her thumb, hesitation in every movement. Because I know who you are, or rather, who your father is. The words landed like a punch. My father, she nodded, gaze lowering. He used to visit our house, years ago, before. She stopped herself, but the sentence hung unfinished. Your last name. I recognized it right away. I just didn't say anything. A cold shiver crawled down my back. My father. A man I barely knew beyond his absence, his debt, his silence. I never imagined she'd have known him, let alone let it change the air between us. You knew him? I asked, careful, wary. I knew of him, she corrected. The kind of man he was, and the kind of hurt he left behind. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. It wasn't shame exactly, but the weight of her seeing me through his shadow. I hated it. Is that why you've been keeping me at arm's length? I asked finally. Her eyes snapped back to mine. Don't think for a second this is about you not being enough. It's about me remembering too well what enough can cost. Her honesty hit harder than I expected. For the first time, the polished armor she always wore cracked wide open, and I saw the ache she carried. Not just from her husband, but from years of knowing men who left wreckage behind. I wanted to tell her I wasn't him, that I'd never be him. But what good are promises spoken too soon? The shop phone rang then, shrill and startling in the thick quiet. We both jumped. She moved to answer, but I reached it first. Bookshop, I said, voice uneven. A man's voice came through, older, sharp. Tell her I know she's there. Tell her to stop avoiding me. Her face went pale when she heard the muffled words. She shook her head quickly, hand gripping the edge of the desk as if the ground had shifted under her feet. Hang up, she whispered. I did, slowly. For the first time she looked afraid, and I realized whatever tied her to my father, or men like him, hadn't disappeared. It was standing between us now, real and immediate. I stepped closer, my voice low. Who was that? Her silence was heavy. Her hand trembled slightly against the desk. And when she finally met my eyes, she said the last thing I expected. Someone who could ruin both of us. The ringing still echoed in my head long after I'd hung up. Her words, someone who could ruin both of us, stuck like splinters under my skin. She was steady on the outside, but I could see the cracks. The slight tremor in her hands, the way her shoulders refused to relax, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. I wanted to demand answers, but the part of me that always softened around her kept me quiet. Instead, I asked, "Do you want me to go?" Her head snapped up. For a moment I thought she'd say yes. Maybe she should have. But she didn't. "No," she said, her voice low. "That's the last thing I want." The honesty in it shook me. My chest felt too tight, too full, like the air wasn't enough. I stepped closer, slow, not wanting to spook whatever fragile thread held us together. "You've been carrying this alone," I said. "And still, you let me in." She let out a breath, uneven, almost like a laugh. "I didn't mean to." "Neither did I." The space between us thinned until I could see the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the tiredness she tried to hide beneath confidence. She looked at me like she wanted to argue, to tell me I was too young, too reckless, too unaware of the dangers pressing against her life. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she whispered, "You don't know how easy it is for this to end badly." I swallowed hard. "Then let's not let it end badly." Her eyes searched mine, desperate for something she couldn't name. And before I could overthink it, I added, "I'm not him. I'm not my father. Whatever shadow he left, you don't have to see me through it." The words felt raw, stripped of every defense. For a second, I worried I'd gone too far. But then she reached out, fingertips grazing my jawline like she was memorizing me with touch alone. "You're nothing like him," she said quietly. Her hand lingered, and I leaned into it without thinking. The moment stretched, the kind that feels like it could collapse or ignite. My heart thundered. I wanted to close the distance, to confess everything I'd been holding back since the first time she'd called me out for smiling too much. But she was the one who broke the silence. "If we do this," she said, steady but trembling at the edges, "we can't pretend afterward. No taking it back." I nodded, throat too tight for words. Her eyes stayed locked on mine, searching, daring. And then she let her hand drop, stepping back just enough to remind me there was still a choice. The room filled with loaded silence. The kind that doesn't end until someone decides which way the story bends. We didn't rush the silence. We let it stretch, heavy and fragile, until it nearly collapsed under its own weight. Somewhere outside, a car passed, headlights brushing across the front windows before disappearing again. The world kept moving, but inside the little shop, it felt like everything had stopped, waiting for us. She finally sat down, shoulders slumping in a way I hadn't seen before. Not graceful, not composed, just tired. Human. "I can't keep carrying the ghosts of men who failed me," she said quietly. "Your father, my husband, that call tonight. It reminded me that running from the past doesn't bury it." I lowered myself onto the floor beside her. "Then maybe you don't have to carry it alone anymore." She gave a small laugh, though her eyes glistened. "You're too young to know what you're offering." "Maybe," I admitted, "but I know what it feels like to be seen." And you've been that for me from the beginning. I want to give that back to you." For a long time, she didn't answer. She just looked at me, the weight of years in her gaze, and I realized this wasn't about age or rules or anyone else's shadow. It was about choice, and she was choosing whether to step forward or stay locked behind the life she'd been surviving. Her hand found mine at last. Not dramatic, not trembling, just steady. Promise without words. Something in my chest loosened, like a knot untied. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The closeness was enough, the silence saying more than any confession could. Because in that moment, I knew we had crossed the line already. Not with touch, but with truth. The books lay forgotten around us, piles of memory waiting to be sorted. But the story between us had already shifted. It wasn't about her late husband anymore, or my father's shadow, or even the phone call that threatened to unravel her calm. It was about us daring to believe something new could be written. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear. "Whatever comes next, we'll face it. But no more pretending." I nodded. No more pretending. The clock ticked on. The night deepened. And though I didn't know what tomorrow would demand of us, I knew this much. Something had changed. Permanently. That night, as I locked up the shop and walked home, her words stayed with me, looping in my head the way her laugh had that first afternoon. A reminder that what scared me most wasn't losing her. It was never having tried. And for once, I wasn't afraid.